Good morning, and thanks for joining me here on the KOTA Territory Live Desk. This morning, we're bringing you Governor Larry Rhoden's second weekly legislative press conference of the 2026 session. This is taking place at the state capitol in Pierre. Governor Rhoden is expected to introduce a new bill, and he will be joined by legislative leadership and Reverend Will Graham. Let's hear what he has to say.
What happened in St. Paul, where out-of-state professional agitators invaded the sanctuary of a church and disrupted their religious ceremony, their worship. And I saw the people terrorizing families. Mothers were ushering their young children out of the building, and it made me angry. And as I watched as Don Lemon, who was a participant, supposedly a journalist covering it, was talking about the importance of the First Amendment for those folks to be there. And I remember the pastor saying that you're interrupting Christians in their worship ceremony, and it's shameful. And it's not just shameful, in my opinion, it's criminal. And this bill will send a message to those out-of-state agitators that if they come to South Dakota, they should plan to stay a while. And I appreciate the governor taking the leadership on this important legislation. Thank you.
Senator Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Good morning, everybody. I think a lot of the information's been covered, so I'll just say this real succinctly. South Dakota has a tradition of respecting places of worship. What this bill does is clearly communicates that we're not going to tolerate that type of behavior if you come to interrupt that place of worship and individuals that are practicing their religious rights. So I support it. Appreciate the governor's office for working with us and involving us with this process and this bill.
Thank you. And with that, we will open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
There are already federal statutes that cover these. The federal government has already pressed charges against a couple of these people, and I think they're going to press charges against others that were involved in this. Why do you think the state also needs to have another layer of that, of criminality in that area?
Well, in my years in the legislature, it's been my experience that there are a number of, duplications of state law and federal law. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion at the federal level, to what extent there was laws broken. And so we're just going to make it very clear in South Dakota that it's not allowable in South Dakota. It rises to the extent of a felony.
You use the phrase disrupt, interrupt. Do we have a definition for these things? Because let's say there's like a 16-year-old who doesn't want to go to church and is maybe being a bit obnoxious about it. Is that a felony offense? How are we defining what a disruption is to a felony degree?
Well, I would offer that is a matter of common sense, and in South Dakota, I have no doubt that would be interpreted in that regard. And
well, yeah, I would just, the governor is exactly right, and that would also be prosecutorial discretion, that a prosecutor, we don't have prosecutors in South Dakota who are looking to overcharge some kid for something that's clearly not within the meaning of the law. And that would be how that would be handled.
yeah, I'm afraid there'd be thousands of little felons running around our state if that was the case.
I guess just aside from like the legal perspective on this obviously in a state like Minnesota, I would imagine there's just a much larger crowd of people that would have an interest in doing something like this as opposed to South Dakota. Do you really feel like that's a threat here in the state?
It's an interesting question because I tend to ask myself the same thing. But then I see things that happen in South Dakota that, we feel kind of like we're isolated and insulated in South Dakota from that sort of behavior. But then something happens that kind of brings it home to me that we're not. And so I think this is being proactive, but it's much better than in cases, and we talked about some cases on my team in the past where we had to scramble. You remember when there were a couple soldiers that were being brought home for their funeral in Yankton. And I was in the legislature, and they had the protesters that were protesting funerals at that time of fallen soldiers. And I use that as an example because we hustled around, and it was the first time, I think, in the history of the state. We suspended all the rules and introduced legislation and passed it on the same day to disallow them from protesting those funerals. And I think if you think that we're doing this because it won't happen or hasn't happened yet, well, we're not insulated from that sort of thing happening in South Dakota, so we'll be proactive in making sure it doesn't.
I guess along the lines of disruption, the bill itself doesn't mention disruption. It mentions by threat or violence keeping someone from practicing religious activities. So standing outside of a church, being really loud, making it hard to hear other ways of...
I hope there's no omen involved in that.
Other ways of disrupting but not threatening or having any threats of violence, that would still be allowable? Just want clarification on that.
Well, again, that would be all to the discretion of the prosecutors, but I think I have no concerns in that regard. Jonathan.
This is kind of maybe a constitutional law 101 thing. The protesters at that protest said, "Oh, we're covered by the First Amendment." Explain maybe why you don't think that that's true.
Well, it's pretty simple, I think. You can't violate the First Amendment with the First Amendment, and you have both freedoms: freedom of religion and freedom of speech, both in the First Amendment. Bob?
So Governor, regarding the future fund and legislation and your executive order, the Government Operations and Audit Committee has a bill in that would put some restrictions on it. That's stalled in a committee. Yesterday during the legislative leadership news conferences, the leadership discussed some of those things. Are you in any way interested in some kind of legislation that would put permanent guardrails around it, such as are in your executive order?
Well, we talked about that last week somewhat as far as whether or not, I would support legislation that had exactly the same language as the executive order. And I indicated that obviously I stand behind the executive order. Having said that, that's, if we were talking about that, it'd be one discussion. Obviously, the legislation that's proposed right now puts some very tough restrictions on the use, and it's a dramatic change in the way we're doing business right now with the future funds. So I do not support that legislation, and I think it's wrong-headed, and for a lot of reasons. On the front of codifying an executive order, it's not that simple. If they could put that exact same language in code, that'd be one thing. That doesn't make for good legislation. I don't know what it would end up looking like when it goes through the process and the LRC were to draft that executive order into legislation. I just have to see what that looks like.
Well, just to follow up then, is there any legislation that you would favor that would put more restrictions on the executive or on use of the future fund, or do you just want it to stay the way it is now?
Well, answer is yes. it's not broke. We don't need to fix it. We especially, it's going the wrong direction. I think if the legislators want the governor to be more accountable, you don't put it in the hands of people that are unaccountable. By the future funds, the control of that being in the governor's hand, the governor's the one person that's accountable to all the voters of the state versus a board or commission that hasn't. So it's wrong-headed to think that you're going to be have more accountability when you're taking it out of the hands of the governor and putting it in the hands of a board.
Well, some of the,
The House leaders are here now, so we maybe want to go back to the.
well, if I could just finish a second.
That work?
I just want to
Okay.
finish. Some of the criticism about the use of the future fund came as a result of things that your predecessor did in her second term. And in a second term, there is no accountability for a governor. So that seems to be the complaint among some of the legislators. And I just wondered if you could address that.
Well, I'm not going to address what my predecessor did and that passed. You know, I have made it clear how I'm going to do business, and I made it especially clear in the executive order, and that is that's part of the reason that we did that executive order, to put in writing what I've already been doing in practice to provide that assurance, whether it's this term or my last term. Those will be the standards that I live by as long as I'm governor. And we have the House leadership just got out of their committee, so we'll revert to order of business 1, which was introducing the remarks. So I'll turn it over to Representative Odenbaum.
Well, thank you. Sorry we're late. I just want to speak on behalf, and maybe he'll chime in too. The Speaker Hansen and I are glad to be a part of this effort. I think every good South Dakotan was appalled to take a look at what went on with the intimidation of Christians over in Minnesota. And, you know, I think we have to be very careful when we tread on this ground. I'm a Christian. I think we're all Christians. If you're somebody seeking Christian answers to life's greatest questions, you're welcome in church. We want you there. But if you're coming there to do communist agitation, then the law in South Dakota is going to be there to bring you to justice. And people need to know that in this state, and so I'm happy to support this effort. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be with you all today. You know, it's funny, you walk into this room and there's a discussion of a lot of politics going on, but there are some issues that transcend politics. There are some issues that, as South Dakotans, we come together and we say, well, we look at what happened over in Minnesota, where people are entering churches and protesting as people are trying to just worship the Lord in a sacred house of worship. We're not going to stand for that here. And so when we see something like that, we're going to make sure that the people of this state are protected in their religious liberty. Me and the leader are just honored to be a part of that. We're going to make sure we shepherd that and lead that through the House. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. We're going to go to the phones for a couple questions. I know there's a few people on the phone, so a question or two from there.
Hey, this is Ariel with KFS Health News. Can you hear me?
Kinda, yes, go ahead.
Okay, first, I just want to say we're not all Christians. I'm Jewish. Just want to point that out there. I just really feel like I have to say that. I want to remind people that there was a recent alleged arson at a synagogue. But that's not my question. My question is, Governor, you said that you want to introduce legislation to stop abortion bills from coming into South Dakota. And I wonder if you have any updates with that plan. And I'm specifically curious how you might get around potential challenges related to interstate commerce, since it would be, you know, coming through the mail, which is an interstate issue.
Well, I don't have any updates as far as any progress on that front. But on your last question about interstate commerce, I'd remind you that abortions are illegal in South Dakota. And so, I'm not a lawyer, but I feel pretty safe in saying that, we're not violating interstate commerce by disallowing, abortion pills to be transported by mail into South Dakota.
And how would you make sure that the same pills that can be used for abortion will be able to reach hospitals who are using those same exact pills to manage miscarriages?
Well, there's nothing that would prohibit them from receiving those legitimately in the mail for legitimate legal purposes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Governor. Reports recently have said that South Dakota is. Thank you. Reports recently have said that South Dakota is one of the most expensive states to deliver a baby. Do you think that the state plays a role in making those costs affordable?
Do I think the state is what?
Do you think the state has a role in ensuring those costs like that are affordable to mothers?
Well, I wasn't familiar with the statistic that we were the most expensive state.
It's not the most expensive. It's ranked third from a 2020 report.
Yes. Well, I'd have to look into that and see what the causation was behind that, and depending on what those answers are, then whether the state would have a role in it. Tony?
Yeah, I would just add another significant topic, and one I know that the health systems are working on and that we hope the rural transformation money will help with, is access to the OB services too, particularly West River. There's a pretty large land area now where there's no access to OB services. You go from Pierre and Chamberlain to Rapid City. And that's an access issue that we need to do something about.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. Alex, go ahead.
Hi. So the Reverend is in the room. Did Reverend Graham, did he have any input on this bill that was introduced this morning? Does he have any thoughts on this bill?
Does
he have any thoughts?
I did not have any.
Step up to the mic.
I didn't have anything to do with the bill, but I'm very grateful for it, since I am a minister myself, preacher of the gospel. And so, and I don't think it's just for Christianity. I think it's for all houses of worship. It's going to be covering. And so we're grateful for that. So I'm thankful for that, how South Dakota leads the way. They don't follow. They take the lead on things. So I'm grateful for that. So very grateful.
One more question, if anyone wants it.
I'll just take a stab at it. Obviously, state affairs it's a ballot measure. It wouldn't come across your desk, but they're pushing a ballot measure that would ban eminent domain for the purpose of private gain. I know there's like a big kind of dialogue as to how economic development should be approached in the state. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that piece of legislation?
It was amended in committee this morning, and we haven't seen the amendment.
Yeah.
The amendment was language, and I'm forgetting the second one. It didn't change the bill all that drastically.
Yeah. I met with the sponsors of that, and obviously we haven't seen what it looks like, and it's a resolution, so it doesn't come to my desk for a signature, and I can't veto it. So that's primary understanding. What I've shared with them, and I'll share with you, is because I've said it publicly many times in years past, that we need to quit putting more and more stuff in our Constitution. The Constitution was written the way it is for a reason, and I think sometimes we make a mistake. And you look at the number of ballot issues. How many are going to be on right now as it stands in the next election? A number. What?
6 or 7.
6 or 7.
I'll explain it later.
Okay. But I've been pretty outspoken and pretty plain spoken about continuing to add, even really good ideas, just cluttering up our Constitution with more and more stuff.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate you being here and all your questions.
Thank you all.
And that wraps up this weekend's briefing from Governor Larry Rhoden, live from the state capitol in Pierre. The governor will continue holding these weekly updates throughout the 2026 legislative session as lawmakers tackle bills and debate key issues facing the state. This was his second news conference of the session. As you just heard, he introduced a new bill relating to protecting places of religion from disruptions. It comes after the protests, or after an incident in St. Paul in the last week where protesters are accused of disrupting a worship service there. There are now federal charges in place against at least 3 protesters who are accused in that incident. Also, the governor addressed topics like the Future Fund, abortion, drugs, and costs of having a baby in the state. He did have a funny moment where he was surprised by a 6-7 reference, which his fellow politicians were telling him that they have to take him aside to explain what that means. Thanks for joining us this morning for continuing coverage from the Capitol. Stay with us with KOTA Territory News as we break down for you on air on our website, kotatv.com, and on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Again, thanks for joining me and have a great day.